Welcome to Coffee Break. Thoughtful conversations for a busy world. Let's begin.
When you're growing up, you learn this really strange kind of unspoken balancing act.
Oh, absolutely. It starts so early.
Right. It's almost like someone hands you a bunch of these fragile, incredibly delicate glass spheres. And, one of those spheres is your boss's mood.
Yeah, and another sphere is your mother's expectation.
Exactly. Or it's your best friend's need for a favor, or even just your neighbor's opinion of your lawn. And from a very young age, you are implicitly told that your entire worth depends on never letting a single one of those glass spheres drop.
So you become this perpetual human juggler. I mean, the stakes feel incredibly high, almost like a life or death situation.
They really do.
If even one of those spheres drops, it shatters into a million pieces. And the overwhelming feeling is that the resulting mess is entirely, unequivocally your fault.
Which means you spend your days absolutely terrified at the sound of breaking glass. You become hypervigilant.
You're constantly watching everyone's faces.
Right, reading their tones, anticipating their needs before they even voice them, just to keep all those spheres perfectly suspended in the air. You become a hostage to their emotional fragility.
Which is an exhausting way to live.
It is. And that's exactly why today's source material makes such a radical, honestly paradigm-shifting claim. It argues that your baseline happiness is directly tied to your willingness to let those glass spheres shatter.
It's a bold claim.
Very. So, to close out this current batch of deep dives, we are focusing on living an authentic life. And specifically, we're dissecting a conceptual excerpt from a piece titled The Art of Disappointing People for Personal Peace.
And we really want to dig into the subtitle of that piece, which is the direct correlation between your happiness and your ability to disappoint people.
Yes, so the mission here for you, the listener, is to explore why being disliked by the wrong people isn't a failure. It's actually a vital sign of progress.
We need to fundamentally rewire how we think about our social interactions. We're going to break down the actual mechanics of why disappointing others is a prerequisite for finding your own baseline of peace.
Right, and how you transition from being paralyzed by the fear of dropping a sphere to intentionally setting them down.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the implications for your daily life are vast and completely counterintuitive.
It definitely flies in the face of the whole be nice to everyone golden rule we're all spoon-fed from kindergarten.
Totally. But if we look closely at the specific terminology the author uses, it's very deliberate. They don't call it the accident of disappointing people.
Or the tragedy of disappointing people.
Right. They deliberately frame it as an art and an ability.
Which is so interesting because society usually frames disappointing others as a moral failure, like a severe character flaw.
Oh, for sure. If someone is disappointed in you, the immediate knee-jerk assumption is that you did something wrong.
Exactly. The assumption is you were selfish or lazy or just inconsiderate.
But by elevating the act of disappointing someone to an art and an ability, the source is implying that it's a learned skill.
It requires intentionality, it requires practice, nuance, and finesse. It really moves the concept away from just being carelessly antagonistic.
Right, like you're not just going around ruining people's days for the fun of it.
No, not at all. It places it firmly in the realm of conscious, deliberate action.
Which implies there's a clumsy way to do it, right? A way that causes unnecessary collateral damage.
Yeah, definitely. If we look at the word ability, it suggests a spectrum of competence.
Like someone can be a total novice at disappointing people.
And that novice behavior might look like avoiding someone completely, or ghosting them.
Or exploding in resentment after months of suppressed anger. I think we've all been there.
Oh, absolutely. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have the master, the artist, who can deliver a no with such clarity and grounding that it actually earns respect.
Even amidst the disappointment, it makes me think of an analogy. If disappointing people is an art, then you, the listener, are the sculptor.
I like that.
You start with this massive, undefined block of marble, which basically represents all the expectations placed on you by your family, your workplace, your society.
And when you practice this art, you aren't just taking a sledgehammer and smashing the rock to pieces out of blind rage.
Exactly. You're taking a chisel and you are carefully, deliberately chipping away other people's expectations to reveal your actual authentic shape underneath.
So the marble that falls to the floor is the disappointment of others. It is the expectation they had of who you should be just falling away.
And you have to let that marble fall if you ever want the sculpture to be finished.
The untrained individual looks at that pile of rubble on the floor and feels intense guilt. They think they've destroyed something valuable.
Because that's what we're taught to feel.
Right. But the artist looks at the rubble and recognizes it as the necessary byproduct of creation. Without removing that material, the form remains trapped inside the stone.
Okay, but wait. I need to push back on this premise just a little bit.
Do for it.
Isn't internal equilibrium or personal peace just a highly sanitized, really polite way of saying, doing whatever I want?
That's a very common critique, actually.
They genuinely needs help moving. They're in a bind, they can't afford movers, and I just want to sit on my couch and watch Netflix because I feel like it.
Okay, playing devil's advocate.
Right. Claiming personal peace as my reason for saying no sounds like a highly convenient, intellectualized excuse for just being a bad, selfish friend. How do we differentiate between maintaining a defensive perimeter and just being entirely self-absorbed?
What's fascinating here is that this is the critical friction point of the entire theory. To distinguish between selfishness and this specific art form, we have to examine the direction of the demand.
The direction of the demand? What do you mean by that?
Well, selfishness is characterized by projecting demands outward. It is the expectation that other people must sacrifice their resources, their time, or their comfort to serve your ego or your convenience.
Oh, okay. I see.
The art of disappointment, conversely, is about maintaining a defensive perimeter. It is the refusal to sacrifice your own foundational boundaries to serve someone else's comfort.
So in my scenario, if I promise to help my friend move, and I back out simply because I'm feeling lazy, that's just a breach of integrity.
Exactly. You made a commitment and reneged. However, let's change the variables. If you have been working 80-hour weeks, your physical health is deteriorating, and your friend demands you sacrifice your single day of recovery to save them the inconvenience of hiring help.
And then they get angry when I decline.
Right. That is where the art applies.
So it hinges entirely on capacity and the preservation of the self. Selfishness is demanding others deplete themselves for you. The art of disappointment is refusing to deplete yourself for them.
Consider the mechanics of the interaction. When you are operating from a place of people-pleasing, you are essentially functioning as a limitless resource for everyone else.
Like an open reservoir.
Exactly. When someone comes to draw water and you finally say, the water level is too low, I cannot give you any today, their disappointment is inevitable.
Because they're thirsty, and they are used to you providing.
But their disappointment does not make your refusal malicious. It makes it necessary for your survival.
Okay, so the art is in looking at your friend, acknowledging their difficult situation, but holding your boundary, saying something like, I see that you are in a tough spot and I value our friendship, but I am physically incapable of helping you move this weekend. I have to rest.
And the true finesse, the highest level of this art form, is how you handle what happens next.
The silence, the reaction.
Yes, because as a novice, your instinct is to immediately fill that silence with a barrage of over-explanations.
Oh man, I do this all the time. I'm so sorry, my back hurts, and I have this big presentation on Monday, and my dog is acting weird, and I just really can't.
Right. You give them a menu of excuses hoping they will select one and validate it, thereby granting you permission to say no.
Wow. Yeah, that's exactly what that is.
Over-explaining is a classic symptom of the novice. By providing a litany of excuses, you are inadvertently inviting negotiation.
You're signaling that your no is conditional and up for debate.
Precisely. If you say your back hurts, they might suggest you just pack light boxes. If you say you're busy, they might ask for just 1 hour.
So the artful approach requires compassionate but immovable clarity.
It requires you to state your boundary and then, and this is honestly the hardest part, tolerate the resulting discomfort without trying to manage their emotional response.
Okay, but if setting this boundary triggers this massive defensive mechanism in our brains, why do it? What is the actual psychological payoff that outscales that immediate panic?
Well, that brings us back to the source material's central claim.
Right, because it doesn't just suggest this is a good idea. It claims there is a direct correlation between your happiness and your ability to disappoint people. That is a mathematical proposition.
Let's examine what a direct correlation means in this psychological context. Imagine a graph.
Okay, picturing a graph.
The x-axis represents your willingness and functional ability to let people down, to say no, to hold a boundary, to exist as an inconvenience.
And the y-axis?
The y-axis represents your baseline of personal happiness and peace. The source posits that as you move to the right on the x-axis, as your capacity to tolerate others' disappointment increases, your personal happiness travels upward in tandem.
So the more capable you are of disappointing people, the happier you will be.
Yes, it's a proportional relationship.
Huh. I mean, I never really thought about it as a proportional metric before. It completely subverts the deeply ingrained conditioning that tells us happiness is a communal achievement.
We're taught from infancy that if everyone around us is happy, if everyone is pleased with our performance, then we are permitted to feel happy.
But this text argues that happiness is not found in universal approval. It is found in the deliberate reclamation of your own agency.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If we look at the neurological and evolutionary reality of this, it feels almost impossible. We are biologically wired to be people pleasers, aren't we?
We absolutely are. Thousands of years ago on the savannah, if you disappointed your tribe, you were exiled.
And an exiled human was a dead human?
So our brains perceive the disappointment of others not just as a social faux pas, but as a literal mortal threat.
That explains so much, because when I have to tell someone no, I don't feel a sense of impending happiness. My heart rate accelerates, my palms sweat, and I feel physically nauseous.
The physiological response you are describing is entirely rooted in the amygdala. It is the body's ancient alarm system functioning exactly as it was designed.
So it's basically a false alarm in the modern world.
Right. When you perceive disapproval, your nervous system triggers a fight, flight, or freeze response. But in the context of social dynamics, it often triggers a fourth trauma response, which is fawning.
Fawning, let's talk about that, because fawning is the act of immediately subjugating your own needs to appease the perceived threat, right?
Yes. It masquerades as being nice or being accommodating, but it is actually a survival mechanism driven by pure terror.
Let's dive deeper into the mechanics of that fawning response, because I think a lot of listeners might recognize themselves in this without realizing it's a fear response.
It's very common in professional settings.
Yeah, like when your boss suggests a terrible idea, and instead of offering constructive criticism, you instantly find yourself nodding enthusiastically and volunteering to lead the project.
It's an automatic override of your critical thinking and your boundaries to neutralize the threat of conflict.
You're attempting to control your environment by controlling how others perceive you.
If you can anticipate their needs and fulfill them perfectly, you remain indispensable and therefore safe from exile.
The problem is that we are no longer living on the savannah. Disappointing your coworker does not mean you will be left to starve in the wilderness.
But your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and a disappointed mother-in-law.
That is a terrifying but very accurate comparison. So to understand the correlation with happiness, we have to look at how we process these two very different types of discomfort.
Yes, the acute spike versus the chronic drain.
Think of it like a mechanical system. If you are a chronic people pleaser, constantly adapting to everyone else's load, it's like running an engine without any oil.
That's a great way to visualize it.
The friction isn't necessarily loud or explosive at first. It's a low-grade, constant grinding. It is chronic emotional fatigue.
You wake up exhausted, you go to sleep exhausted.
Because the background process of managing everyone's glass spheres is draining your battery 24/7.
And that chronic friction eventually destroys the machine. It leads to burnout, somatic illnesses, severe depression, and, honestly, a total loss of identity.
Now, contrast that with the act of exercising your ability to disappoint someone. When you set a boundary, you experience an acute, temporary spike in discomfort.
It is a sharp, sudden surge of cortisol and adrenaline. That is the nausea you mentioned earlier, the evolutionary alarm bell ringing.
But the critical difference is the duration. That acute spike is a wave. It crests, it breaks, and then it recedes.
If you hold your ground, yes.
Right, if you breathe through the physiological panic and remind your nervous system that you are safe and not actually facing exile, the wave passes. And what it leaves behind is cleared ground.
It leaves a space where the chronic, grinding friction used to be. You are effectively trading the lifelong, slow-drip agony of self-abandonment for the sharp, temporary pain of boundary setting.
So the direct correlation proposed by the text exists because every single time you choose the acute discomfort over the chronic drain, every time you tolerate the nausea and say no, you reclaim a piece of your autonomy.
And autonomy, the profound sense of being the author of your own existence, is the foundational building block of authentic happiness.
It's the difference between being a passenger in a car driven by the collective demands of your social circle, and actually putting your own hands on the steering wheel.
When you please people at your own expense, you are handing them the keys.
When you disappoint them to protect your peace, you're taking the keys back. And the text specifically uses the phrase personal peace. I think that's important.
It is. It doesn't promise euphoria.
Right. It doesn't say you will feel a constant state of ecstatic joy. Peace is quieter than that.
Peace is the absence of that engine friction.
It's the ability to sit in your living room on a Saturday night, knowing that someone somewhere might be slightly annoyed with you, but feeling completely grounded in your decision because you honored your own capacity.
That grounded solidity is the absolute prerequisite for authenticity. But that personal peace is fundamentally impossible if you are constantly shape-shifting.
Because if you are altering your gears to fit every other machine you encounter, you don't actually have a baseline to return to.
To live an authentic life, you have to define your own values, your own opinions, and your own limits.
You basically have to pick a shape. And the moment you take a definitive shape, the moment you stop being a shapeless blob of compliance, you're inevitably going to clash with someone else's preferences.
It's unavoidable. If you decide that honesty is your core value, you are going to disappoint the people who rely on polite fictions.
If you decide that rest is a core value, you are going to disappoint the people who demand relentless productivity.
Therefore, trying to be everyone's favorite person is an actual mathematical impossibility unless you are living in a constant state of self-betrayal.
Which brings us to a harsh but really illuminating metric. The idea that being universally liked is actually a massive red flag.
It really is. If you examine your life and realize that literally everyone in your orbit thinks you are the easiest, most agreeable person in the world, it feels like a triumph.
It feels like you have won the social game.
But in reality, it often means you are serving as a frictionless lubricant for everyone else's life.
Ouch. Yeah, you aren't a person to them. You're a convenience. You are an appliance that always works and never requires maintenance.
Exactly. If you are universally accommodating, people don't necessarily love you. The complex, flawed, multifaceted human being with sharp edges and distinct preferences.
They love the seamless experience you provide. They love that you absorb their stress, accommodate their schedules, and never push back.
You become a blank canvas upon which everyone else paints their immediate needs.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the core focus of our deep dive really sharpens. The realization that being disliked by the wrong people is actually a vital sign of progress.
Yes, it is the data proving that your system of boundaries is functioning correctly.
But let's define the wrong people, because that can sound incredibly judgmental. We aren't talking about cartoon villains here.
No, we aren't talking about objectively evil people. In the context of this behavioral math, the wrong people are those who view your compliance as a prerequisite for their affection or their respect.
They are the individuals whose relationship with you is entirely conditional on your willingness to subjugate your needs to theirs.
And when you have spent years operating as a people pleaser, you've essentially trained your ecosystem to expect endless accommodation.
You've set the precedent that your boundaries are entirely permeable. You've taught them that your no actually means convince me.
Or make me feel guilty enough, and I'll eventually say yes.
Precisely. So, the moment you start practicing the art of disappointment, the moment you introduce an immovable no into the ecosystem, the system experiences a profound shock.
The people who genuinely love the authentic you will undoubtedly experience a moment of adjustment. They might feel a brief, natural disappointment because they wanted your time or your help.
But they will ultimately respect the boundary because they value your well-being. They want you to have personal peace.
A healthy relationship can absorb disappointment.
Right. A good friend will say, man, I'm really bummed you can't make the trip, but I know how burned out you've been. Let's grab coffee when things settle down.
They manage their own disappointment without demanding you fix it. But the wrong people, the ones who value your utility over your humanity, will react with disproportionate volatility.
They will employ guilt trips, passive aggression, anger, or sudden withdrawal.
They will attempt to punish you for prioritizing your personal peace over their convenience. They will accuse you of changing, of being selfish, of no longer being the good friend or the dedicated employee you used to be.
And when that pushback happens, the novice artist immediately drops the chisel.
The fawning response kicks back in.
The amygdala fires, and the internal monologue screams, I made a mistake. I set a boundary and they got mad. I need to apologize and fix it immediately.
But what this text is trying to teach us is that their negative reaction is not a sign of failure. It is the exact metric of success.
It is the ultimate litmus test for the structural integrity of your relationships.
If your no causes someone to withdraw their love, their respect, or their basic decency, it reveals that their affection was entirely conditional on your subservience.
Losing that conditional approval feels intensely painful in the short term because it triggers that ancient fear of exile. But it is the shedding of a massive, destructive weight.
Every time you disappoint someone who demands you shrink yourself for their comfort, your capacity for authentic happiness expands. The correlation holds true.
But let's look at the edge cases, because theory is clean, but reality is messy.
Always.
What happens when the person you are disappointing holds structural power over you?
The workplace scenario.
Yeah, let's go back to the office. It's 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. Your boss walks over and drops a massive, non-urgent project on your desk, asking you to work through the weekend.
A classic situation.
And let's say your livelihood, your health insurance, your ability to pay your mortgage is tied to this job. Setting a boundary here isn't just about managing social anxiety. It has real material stakes.
It does.
How does the art apply when survival is actually on the line?
Navigating structural power dynamics requires the highest level of this art form. It requires differentiating between insubordination and boundary setting.
Because if you just say, no, I'm not doing that, I want my personal peace, you might get fired, which obviously destroys your peace.
Exactly. The art in a high-stakes scenario is about managing the friction professionally while refusing to internalize the guilt of their disappointment.
It's about shifting the burden of reality back onto them.
Yes. The practitioner of this art acknowledges the request, but firmly states the limits of their capacity. They might say, I understand this project is a priority. I have a hard stop at 5 p.m. today. I can dedicate my first 2 hours on Monday morning to tackling the initial phase, or we can deprioritize the Johnson account to free up my schedule next week. How would you like me to allocate my time?
Brilliant. But the boss will likely be visibly disappointed.
Of course. They wanted the frictionless experience.
They wanted you to magically expand your capacity so they wouldn't have to make a hard management decision. The marble hits the floor.
And this is the crucible moment for the listener. You have to let the boss be disappointed. You do not rush to fill the silence.
You do not offer to check your email, just in case.
You stand in the acute discomfort of their displeasure. You let them manage their own emotions and their own project timelines.
Because their lack of planning or their unrealistic expectations do not constitute an emergency on your part. And they certainly do not require you to sacrifice your weekend.
And if we look at the mechanics of what happens internally when you hold that line as you walk out the door at 5 p.m., the acute anxiety of the confrontation is peaking.
Your heart is racing.
But as you get further away from the building, the adrenaline metabolizes. And what replaces it?
The quiet, grounded solidity of personal peace. You didn't betray yourself.
The correlation proves out. The willingness to let the boss's sphere drop allowed you to hold the sphere of your own life securely.
This requires a massive cognitive reframing. We must stop viewing the disappointment of others as an automatic indictment of our character.
In many cases, disappointing someone is actually an act of deep, profound integrity.
It means you are honoring a prior commitment you made to yourself or to your family over a sudden, intrusive demand made by someone else. That frames it perfectly.
Disappointing someone can be an act of deep integrity.
Because if your default answer to every request is yes, your yes essentially loses all value. It has no currency.
It's just an autonomic reflex, like a knee-jerking when a doctor taps it with a hammer.
But when you are fully capable of saying no, your yes becomes incredibly powerful. When you do agree to help a friend move or take on an extra project, you are doing it from a place of genuine capacity, desire, and conscious choice, not from a place of fear.
Consider the alternative. When you curate your life through the avoidance of disappointment, you inevitably breed hidden resentments.
And resentment is the silent killer of intimacy and connection.
Think about how many relationships, marriages, decades-long friendships, working dynamics are slowly decaying from the inside out because one person is constantly complying while silently seething with anger.
Resentment is like rot in the foundation of a house. It's entirely invisible from the outside, but it compromises the structural integrity of everything built on top of it.
Take the classic family holiday example.
Right. You agree to host the massive family holiday dinner for the 5th year in a row because you don't want to disappoint your mother.
You smile as you serve the food, but internally you are furious.
You are tallying every single dish you washed, every hour you spent prepping, And you are radiating hostility because nobody is helping you enough.
And that hostility stems directly from your own failure to practice the art of boundary setting.
By desperately trying to avoid disappointing your family, you end up harboring deep resentment toward them.
You sacrifice your personal peace, and ironically, you completely fail to create true harmony.
You just create a brittle facade of harmony built on top of a dormant volcano of your own suppressed frustration. It's a complete lose-lose scenario.
The family experiences a tense, passive-aggressive host, and you experience a miserable, exhausting holiday.
If you had utilized the ability to disappoint them months earlier, if you had calmly stated, "I do not have the capacity to host this year, we will need to make alternative plans," they would have experienced an acute spike of disappointment.
But by the time the holiday arrived, the wave would have passed, your peace would have been preserved, and you could have actually enjoyed their company.
The mathematics of the correlation hold up under scrutiny. It is a linear journey out of resentment and into authenticity.
But the journey requires dismantling the good girl or good boy conditioning that has been wired into our neural pathways since childhood.
Because we are largely graded, both academically and socially, on our compliance.
In traditional educational systems, the easiest path to success isn't necessarily radical creativity or authentic self-expression. It is quiet, frictionless compliance.
Sit still, follow the rubric, don't cause trouble, and above all, do not disappoint the authority figure. The system explicitly rewards the suppression of individuality in favor of group management.
We internalize the belief that safety equals absolute compliance.
But as we transition into adulthood, that exact same survival mechanism becomes a psychological prison. The rules of engagement change entirely, but nobody tells you.
In adulthood, no one is going to swoop in and hand you a permission slip to take care of yourself.
No one is going to monitor your internal battery gauge and say, "You look depleted, please stop doing things for everyone else."
The adult world is essentially a bottomless pit of demands. It will take whatever you are willing to give it until there is nothing left.
The world will consume you unless you install a floor. And that floor is constructed entirely out of your willingness to say no.
It is built from your practiced ability to tolerate someone else's disappointment.
If you do not build that floor, you will remain in a perpetual freefall of obligation. Peace is not a passive state that you magically stumble into one day when everyone finally stops asking you for favors.
No, it is an actively defended territory. You have to build a fence around it.
And the posts of that fence are the specific moments you consciously choose to let someone down rather than betray your own needs.
To bring this back to the art of it all, I want to talk about the physical execution of that no.
Let's do it. We've established the neurological hurdles, the power dynamics, and the necessity of dropping the marble. But how do you actually stand in that space without crumbling?
Because the silence after a no is deafening.
It really is.
The mastery of the art lies in emotional regulation during that silence. When you deliver a boundary, you must anchor yourself in your own reality rather than floating away into theirs.
So if they express anger, if they sigh heavily, if they employ a guilt trip,
your task is to simply observe it. You do not need to absorb it. You can internally acknowledge they're experiencing disappointment, and that is okay. I am experiencing anxiety, and that is okay.
You hold space for both realities to exist simultaneously. You care about them, and you are prioritizing your peace. The two are not mutually exclusive.
Exactly. It requires you to be your own anchor. You can no longer rely on their external approval to keep you steady.
And when you finally prioritize alignment over popularity, you inevitably filter out the noise. You filter out the people who only love the compliant version of you.
Imagine you have been playing a specific character in a long-running play. A character who never complains, always agrees, and always does the heavy lifting to keep the plot moving.
Okay, I can picture that.
The other actors in the production love your character because it makes their jobs incredibly easy. Now imagine one day you walk on stage, look at the other actors, and rip up the script.
Oh, wow.
You announce, "I am no longer playing this role. I am going to play myself." The other actors are going to be furious. They don't know their lines anymore. You have disrupted the entire established production.
They will accuse you of ruining the play. They will say you've become impossible to work with.
They will say you are selfish. But their anger is simply a grief reaction to the loss of their own convenience.
When you experience that anger, when you realize you have been permanently demoted from being their favorite person, you must recognize it as a profound milestone of growth.
It means you are no longer operating as a functional prop in their life. You have stepped out of their script and into your own reality.
You've transitioned from being a non-player character, just standing in the background of their video game, waiting to hand them a tool, to being the main character of your own life.
And naturally, the people who enjoyed having you as a silent sidekick are going to be intensely annoyed that you suddenly have your own storyline, your own objectives, and your own boundaries.
Which is exactly why the author of our source text can mathematically guarantee that happiness and the ability to disappoint are directly correlated.
Because the deep, resonant joy of finally living your own storyline, the profound relief of dropping the heavy facade of compliance.
It so vastly outweighs the sting of losing the conditional approval of those who never truly saw you in the first place.
This entire concept is incredibly liberating. It's almost like giving the listener permission to just let out a massive years-long exhale.
You don't have to carry it all. You don't have to be the universal shock absorber for everyone else's emotional turbulence.
You are allowed to be inconvenient. You are allowed to take up space.
And honestly, a life where you never ever disappoint anyone sounds incredibly bleak. It sounds flat.
It sounds like a life completely devoid of passion or strong opinions or bold, defining moves. It is a life lived entirely in pastel tones.
A life designed purely for palatability and digestion by others.
If you want to create anything of true consequence, if you want to build deep, meaningful intimacy that isn't based on a lie, or if you simply want to pursue a life that feels like your own,
you will inevitably have to disappoint the people who need you to remain small, quiet, and infinitely available. The marble has to fall.
The marble has to fall. And the more skilled you become at wielding that chisel, the more practiced you are in this specific art, the more defined and beautiful the resulting sculpture of your life will be.
The peace you arrive at won't just be a temporary absence of conflict. It will be a profound, grounded solidity.
You will finally know exactly who you are, and perhaps more importantly, you will know exactly who you are not.
We have covered immense, challenging ground today. We started with the terrifying act of dropping the fragile glass spheres and moved through the neurological realities of why setting boundaries triggers our deepest survival fears.
We examined the engine friction of chronic people-pleasing versus the acute, temporary discomfort of claiming your autonomy.
We explored the difficult truth that being universally liked often means you are serving as a frictionless convenience, and why disappointing the wrong people is the ultimate metric of your progress toward authenticity.
The pursuit of personal peace requires the dismantling of the chameleon. It requires stepping out of the fawning response and standing firmly in the acute discomfort of another person's displeasure without rushing to fix it.
To live an authentic life, you have to be completely okay with not being everyone's favorite person. But as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to move this from abstract psychological theory into your immediate physical reality.
This raises an important question to consider as you go about your week. If your happiness is indeed directly mathematically correlated to your ability to disappoint people.
Who in your life are you currently pleasing at the direct expense of your own personal peace?
Whose fragile glass sphere are you exhausting yourself to keep in the air?
And what would actually happen, neurologically and practically, if you chose to breathe through the fear, pick up the chisel, and artfully disappoint them today?
Let that question rattle around in your brain for a while. It asks you to step intentionally into the exact discomfort you've been running from your entire life.
But the baseline of peace waiting for you on the other side of that acute anxiety is worth the friction. As you step back out into your world, into the office, or into your family dynamic, we encourage you to embrace the necessary discomfort of progress. Let some marble hit the floor, reclaim your authentic shape. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for spending this time with us on Coffee Break. If this conversation stayed with you, you can find more episodes here on the channel. Until next time, take care.